Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us here this evening. And thanks for joining for the latest installment in the PlayUK Russia program, an innovative program to create connections between the UK and Russian games industry professionals. Now, for today's event, we have an interpreter. So to listen to the Russian language version, please click the interpreter button on the bottom right of the screen and choose the Russian channel. We also welcome questions. In fact, we encourage as many questions as possible to come from our audience this evening. At the bottom in the center of the screen, you will see a Q&A button. Please put your questions in there and I will try and get them to ask them to our distinguished visitor this evening, who's going to be doing the talk for us. Now, the PlayUK Russia program is delivered by the Cultural and Education section of the British Embassy in Moscow, and also the Universal University and the Scream School in Moscow, and also Ukie, the trade body for games in the UK. I'm Sam from Ukie and I'm your host for this evening. Now, the UK, the United Kingdom, is an established powerhouse in games development and publishing. From the early days of bedroom coders through to the multinational studios of today, the UK has been at the forefront of games development and games commerce for over 40 years. But at the heart of the games industry, not only in the UK, but also in Russia and around the world, are the incredible people that lead and inspire the sector. And in this series of events, you will hear from industry leaders from the UK games industry. They'll share their stories, their passions, their successes, and some of their failures. In many cases, they're legends of the industry, but each and every one of them are still at the top of their game, creating amazing, enthralling experiences for the players of today. And I'm delighted to welcome this week's guest, Ian Livingstone, widely acknowledged as a founding father of the UK games industry. I'm not going to go into too much detail here because Ian will tell you his story, but just as a very quick snapshot, co-founder of Games Workshop, launched Dungeons and Dragons in Europe, co-authored a raft of major book releases in the Fighting Fantasy series, executive chairman for Eidos when Tomb Raider was released, is an angel investor in a raft of UK studios, and today is the chairman of Sumo Group PLC and the co-founding partner of Hiro Capital, a VC fund investing in video games. Now, if that wasn't impressive enough, Ian also co-authored the Livingstone Hope Next Gen Review in 2011, which has radically changed the government policy on education and digital skills. Ian was honoured by the UK government with a CBE, and it's a real pleasure to welcome Ian to this evening's event. Good evening, Ian.
Good evening, Sam, and hello, Russia.
Hello, Russia, indeed. Now, I'm delighted to say you've got some slides to share with us, so I'm going to hand over to you to take us through your presentation, and thank you.
All right, thanks, Sam. Hello again. I'm here to tell you my kind of fun history during games, all 46 years I've been in the games industry, and hopefully guide and give some good tips for how to be successful in the industry and what a great industry is, because it's all about great people. I think the game industry, as part of the entertainment industry, is one that is an industry that's not being transformed by celebrity or some of glamour that you expect in film and TV and music. There are great people making games, and long may it continue. But my story is, as Sam said, started back in 1975 when I started a company called Games Workshop. An old school friend, Steve Jackson, moved into interactive books in the 80s. Then video games, primarily with Eidos in the 90s. And then I became an angel investor when Eidos was acquired by Square Enix of Japan. And subsequently took on a lot of non-executive roles, including being appointed chairman of Sumo Group PLC, which is in the process of being acquired by Tencent in China for a $1.4 billion acquisition. And last but not least, I turned from being an entrepreneur to an investor by co-founding a venture capital fund for the games industry space called Hiro Capital. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. So I'm also an avid board games player and collector. I mean, that's really what got me into my hobby originally. And you can see on my shelves here a little bit of my collection that I have got one Russian game I can't remember what it's called. I'm sure people could maybe put in the chat what it actually means, but I love my board games because of the social interaction, the fun of people playing together and just enjoying the experience and smiling and doing deals and then reneging on those deals. It's all great fun. So, I got into the games industry not long after chess was invented. I started a company called Games Workshop. As I said, this is me and my two school friends. I'm the handsome guy with the beard and the glasses, holding our very first trade order in 1975. And Steve Jackson on the far right, and John Peake in the middle. And we want to turn our hobby of playing games into a business of making games. And we published this little newsletter called Owl and Weasel, and you can see in February 1975. And we sent it out to everybody we knew in games. And not that we had sent it to him directly, a copy arrived on the desk of this gentleman. This guy, really, we all owe a huge debt to, because this is the man who invented Dungeons and Dragons. This is Gary Gygax. Now, Gary had received a copy of the Owl and Weasel, although we hadn't sent it to him directly. He sent us a letter saying, loved his magazine, love our magazine. Here's this game he's just invented. And that game was Dungeons and Dragons. And as you can see, it didn't look much. A plain box with a very ordinary illustration on the front. But when you opened the box, it opened your imagination like no game had ever done before, to my mind, and no game perhaps ever will again. And D&D, with the whole role-playing aspect of it, was really the foundation of much of the video games industry as it is today. All the role-playing games, the MMOs, the World of Warcrafts, the Skyrims, what would they have been without the original origin story of Dungeons and Dragons? We played it. Steve and I became obsessed. Here was a game in which we took on the roles of heroes and wizards, fighters, clerics, thieves, and navigated a dungeon, rooms and passageways filled with monsters and treasure that had been designed by a dungeon master. So it was effectively instant theater as you collaborated, exploring these dungeons, killing monsters and finding treasure. It was transformational for the imagination, and the rules came into play to decide success or failure. But basically it was interactive theater on the fly. We ordered 6 copies because that's all the money we had. And Gary Gygax was kind enough to give us a 3-year exclusive distribution agreement for the whole of Europe, because he was also operating out of a flat in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, in the United States. And we were kind of making it up as we went along. We decided to leave our jobs, go to the States, sign up all these American games companies, came back to the UK with nowhere to live and no money, and lots of orders on their way being delivered from the US. So we thought, well, we better raise some money. And I'm going to talk about investing in video games later on. But from my own experience, it was very difficult in those days. There was no equity funding. There was no opportunity to go to VC funds for a games industry entrepreneur. So you go to the bank manager, who at that time was very closed-minded about this particular aspect. So we go in and say, got this great game. It's a role-playing game. It's that you're a hero and you're a wizard, and you go in these incredible joys of the mind. And the bank manager looked at us rather like a dog watches television, had no understanding of whatsoever what we were talking about. And so Steve and I didn't get our bank loan and were obliged to live in a van for 3 months. We managed to hire a small office the size of a bread bin, and we joined a local squash club. But our life was a very small, triangular life of doing mail orders during the day, into the van at night, up early, into the squash club for a shave and a shower, and got very good at squash by default. But those days were pretty difficult to be successful. So we had to fund Games Workshop out of cash flow. And here we are in our little office in 1976. In fact, when a customer arrived, one of us had to leave the office because there was enough room for the 3 of us in the room. But when you're passionate and you're young and you believe in something, you're driven by that. And whilst it's a bit predictable to say it was living the dream, we really were living a dream to our minds, because this was our hobby and we were being able to create a business around it. We decided to open our stores because other shops were reluctant to sell Dungeons and Dragons. And this was the opening day of our first Games Workshop store in 1978 on a very damp April morning. But we were very happy, as you can imagine, to see a large crowd of people waiting outside for the shop to open. And that gave us the belief and encouragement to carry on. Of course, Games Workshop grew over time, became a lot more professional. And of course, the whole empire of Workshop is now built on one intellectual property, that is Warhammer. So how did Warhammer come about? Well, as I said earlier, we had a 3-year exclusive distribution agreement with TSR, the publishers of Dungeons and Dragons, at the end of which Gary came over to see us and said he'd like to merge his company with Games Workshop. But Steve and I, being young, independent, young Brits, said no to that merger opportunity because we wanted to remain independent, and we didn't relish the idea of having to spend half our time in the Midwest and the States. So we said no. And so we lost the exclusivity of D&D, and we set about how we're going to manage that problem. So we released a number of board games, but ultimately the whole success of Workshop came from Warhammer, which was designed by Rick Priestley, Richard Halliwell, and Brian Ansell. And Warhammer, as I'm sure many will know, is not just a game in itself, it's a whole publishing empire with licensing of video games and other entertainment franchises built on the Warhammer IP. And one thing I say to games companies when they're starting off as a top piece of advice, if you create your own intellectual property, try to retain ownership of it to build real value in your company. So often is the case that people trade it away for project finance or sell out too soon and inevitably regret that decision further down the line. So it's important, if you want to build real value in a company with sustainable, predictable earnings and deciding your own destiny, hang on to your IP. It's really important. And I'm sure these are not unfamiliar to you, the way that Workshop has prospered over those years. Now, Steve and I sold out in 1991. Some might say a little soon, because the company is now worth over £4 billion on the London Stock Exchange, built really all on the back of the IP, which is Warhammer. And if those of you would like to know a little bit about the origin story of Games Workshop and those early crazy days when we used to make it up as we went along, I've just finished writing a book, which was being published by a crowdfunding publisher, Unbound, and it's going to be out sometime next year. It's called The Dice Man. So during Workshop days, we used to run conventions called Games Day, where thousands of people come along and play role-playing games. Here was a very rudimentary game of Dungeons and Dragons happening at Games Day. And there was a publisher called Penguin Books, very large publisher of books in the UK. And their editor came to Games Day, fascinated by this phenomenon she'd heard about called Dungeons and Dragons. And she was fascinated that so many people were just completely consumed by this role-playing game that was being played on tabletops using miniature figures. And she asked Steve and I if we'd write a book about that hobby. But we said, well, why don't we write a book that allows you to experience that hobby? And she said, sounds like a great idea. Tell us more. And that's how our very first interactive Final Fantasy game book came about. Here you can see the Warlock of Firetop Mountain and Forest of Doom. They look like a normal paperback, but in fact, they were totally different because they were an interactive book in which you, the reader, are the hero, broken up into numbered paragraphs, at the end of which you would make a decision. In this case, whether you were going to do a deal with this guy who's holding this basket to take you up to a higher floor, or just ignore him. So there are hundreds of ways of going through these books. but only one correct way. And they became a phenomenon in the UK and then Europe and then the rest of the world. And they ended up selling some 20 million copies globally, which you would think would be seen as a good thing. Because they were called Fighting Fantasy game books, they had that word game that seems to annoy lots of parts of the establishment and society in general, particularly in those days. They received a lot of bad publicity. The Evangelical Alliance published an 8-page warning guide about them, saying that if you're going to interact with ghouls and demons, you're bound to get possessed by the devil. A woman housewife in deepest suburbia phoned her local radio station saying, having read one of my books, her son levitated. But of course, all the children thought, well, for a couple of pounds, I can fly. Oh, great, I'll have some of that. The local vicar for Penguin Books promised to chain himself to the gates of the publisher until they were banned. There were petitions sent in by worried parents saying that they were concerned that their children were using their imaginations too much. I mean, really? Is that they should be grateful that their children are using their imaginations? But history has never been kind to games. In the 1850s, Scientific American talked about how chess was kind of really a waste of time and people should be doing much nobler things than wasting their time playing games. And of course, when it comes to video games, the media tended to go into a frenzy about the societal problems they could create. And when Grand Theft Auto 5 came out in 2013, rather than being celebrated as a great British success story, it received quite a lot of negative press, despite the fact that it generated over $1 billion in its first 3 days of sales. This is an extraordinary phenomenon. It's the largest entertainment franchise in the world, and yet the critics were always there for a game. Nevertheless, we've seen games move from a niche audience to a mainstream audience. We see children playing games. We see young adults playing games. We see old people like me still enjoying video games. The games are pervasive on public transport. Wherever you go, you see people playing games on their smartphones. We've seen how technology transforms the opportunity. Facebook came in the early 2000s with making Facebook a social games platform. And then, of course, Apple comes along with touch screens to enable a whole different type of casual game to be able to play. We've seen how VR is now making big inroads once again. We've seen AR. We've seen how esports have taken hold. Some of the older people of my age have no understanding why people would want to watch esports. They say, why aren't they watching real world sports? I said, well, today's generation of children, they live their lives through their smart devices. Everything they do, they interact with. So guess what? They also want to have their entertainment being interactive and watch the best in class play games. So you're seeing huge audiences watching esports for large prizes and being streamed to millions of people around the world on Twitch and other streaming platforms. We've seen again how the games industry is actually building the metaverse. We hear Mark Zuckerberg talking about the metaverse, but really it's all about video games technology that's driving that ambition and the opportunity. How Axie Infinity has gone from nothing to a huge company in a very short time, where players are able to earn real money whilst they play. So this is another dynamic, again driven by gaming technology. We've seen how the metaverse itself really is not only built on games technology, but how we don't just play together, we come together, we hang out together, we can transact together, we can converse together, we can run our lives in a digital sense, meeting the real world in the digital worlds that are being created really on the back of games worlds. So I would also argue if these critics could part their prejudice against one or two titles that are 18 rated that shouldn't be played by children anyway, and think what's happening cognitively, I'd argue that games are good for you. A, they're social. You're coming together with like-minded friends, having a good time in a social context. They're good for rehabilitation. Older people can really benefit from playing from games, both physically and mentally. Games require you to problem solve. You can't get through a game without problem solving. It's absolutely essential. Games give you a continuous assessment of how you're doing. You're not punished for making a mistake. In fact, you're encouraged to go again until over time, everyone can become a winner. Games are effectively a management simulation in many cases. Here, Roller Coaster Tycoon, understanding the physics of building the rides, the economy of pricing the rides, the staffing levels required to manage those rides, do it right, and you'll be successful. Do it wrong, you're not punished. You tweak the parameters until over time, everyone can be successful. Theme park manager, that's management simulation. Games like SimCity can contextualize something in school might be boring, like urban planning and regeneration. Games like Minecraft encourage creativity. A 3D architectural tool, effectively digital Lego. A child can learn that applying the heat of a furnace to silica sand, they can build glass and put that in their environment. It's that learning by doing, contextualizing the application of knowledge, which is so important for children, I would say, today. Surgeons can obviously operate without any dire consequences. And of course, flight simulators are a game without the scoring. And I'm sure most people prefer their pilots to have learned using simulation software rather than just reading a book. So I got into video games because of my Final Fantasy game books. I wrote the launch product in 1984 called Eureka for a small company called Domark. And I joined Domark not long after selling out of Workshop in 91. I invested in the company, and a couple of years later, I joined the board, and a couple of years later, we put 4 companies together to create a new company called Eidos Interactive, which we floated on the London Stock Exchange. And of course, Eidos most famously known for Tomb Raider. And again, wearing the intellectual property ownership hat, I always made it an important part of our remit to have own IP. So Eidos not only had Tomb Raider, but had Hitman, Deus Ex, Just Cause, Championship Manager, and others, which were all IP owned by Eidos. So who created Lara Croft? Just to put the record straight, it was Toby Gard, who worked at our office in Derby called Core Design. He was an incredible artist, and he and a small team, in fact, a very small team, came up with the whole Lara Croft game. He'd been required or asked to replace a character called Rick Dangerous, which, as you can see, has a slight similarity to a certain film star whose name I've forgotten. And everyone thought he was going to create another male character, but he'd seen the rise of girl power. He'd seen Tank Girl, Nana Cherry, and it was his brilliant idea to have a female character. So this was the original Lara Croft, then called Lara Cruz, before she changed her surname. And what started as a simple sketch became a multi-billion-dollar franchise. So again, speaking to the value of intellectual property, an original idea can turn into incredibly valuable service or product. So for the 20th time, make sure you hang on to your IP. So here's some early Lara Crofts, and Tomb Raider finally came out in 1996. Became a pop culture phenomenon, gracing not just the magazines from the game industry, but for general media magazines everywhere. And it got to a point, of course, where Lara Croft, incredible character that she became, survived the test of time, like James Bond in cinema. All these companies that you see and recognize here were all very happy to give our company money to be able to use Lara Croft to promote their products, which was good for us, of course. They gave us the money, but secondly, they were marketing and promoting Lara Croft as much as their own products. And they all talked about huge success by that association with Lara. In fact, Lucozade, a soft drinker here in the UK, benefited from a 10% increase in its sales, and even changed the name from Lucozade to Larazade for a 3-month period. And then again, if you own your own IP, all the ancillaries, revenue you can get from licensing and merchandising all goes to help build a franchise on a global scale. So whilst again I'm no longer associated with Lara Croft, haven't been for a number of years now, I always say long live Lara. So getting to where the UK is in terms of the video game industry, we are a very creative nation. Look at our film, our fashion, our music, our television, our publishing, our architecture, and of course our video games. We got off to a flying start with video games because the BBC Micro was a cornerstone of computing in schools, and the Sinclair Spectrum was an affordable programmable computer in the 80s. So it's no surprise that you put a mini programmable computer into a hand of the creative nation, and hey presto, one of the outcomes is video games, to the point today where there are over 2,000 game studios in the UK, a lot of them small micro studios, bootstrapping their way through life on a part-time basis, but with great ambition, and there's no reason with the right help that they can't create the next large franchise. Some of the great video games characters are being developed in the UK, from Little Big Planet, Tomb Raider, Moshi Monsters, Lemmings, and the Lego Harry Potter franchise. We're very good at making games, and that rich heritage going back to the very early days from Manic Miner to Elite with David Braben, to Lemmings, and of course GTA, and of course Peter Molyneux, who spoke to you recently with Populous, Football Manager, and a whole raft of console games that have been successful globally over the years. And mobile games has also had huge success. There's some rather extraordinary successes right here on the screen from a number of UK companies. And we're really good at developing our industry on an incredible basis to have more diversity, not just in consumption of product, but in the creation of products. And it's great to see so many people now coming together to make content that might not, or probably would not have been made some 15 or 20 years ago, perhaps not even 10 years ago. The industry also benefits from two great trade associations. Of course, I'm more well known with being with Ukie, having been on the board for 10 years till I timed out. And I was vice chair of Ukie, and there's a national video games museum where she's promoting the cultural remit of games, not just being games behind glass shelves or on glass shelves. It's really pushing out the skills agenda and the cultural impact of games. To where we are on a global basis, where there are some 3 billion gamers worldwide, 10 million new gamers every month. This is a $200 billion, $2 billion a year industry. It's incredible, but largely goes unnoticed. Some of the huge entertainment franchises generating hundreds of $millions in revenue. Fortnite moved the bar again, creating this mini metaverse where people not just play together, but participate in large events. But at the same time, the industry, until a few years ago, well, probably 15 years ago, was still governed by consoles and PCs that were intimidating to some players. But along comes Apple with swipe technology and an all-you-can-eat, easy-to-access app store, presenting and creating a new way of playing from casual games that's kind of doubled the market overnight, effectively. And ultimately, you see today some 50% of the revenues coming from the industry are coming from mobile, which is extraordinary. Seeing how games like Clash of Clans out of Finland are still successful today, as the game industry has moved from a physical product sold at a premium price in retail, managing the distribution channel ultimately to get to consumers. And if those games weren't as good as the publisher or developer thought they were, you'd get physical returns in terms of inventory. And so managing that supply chain with all the inherent risk around physical product and returns was challenging in our days of Eidos. But today, of course, games are now a service, often free at the point of delivery. and being able to monetize a global audience on day one through whatever digital platform you choose to release on, from PCs through Steam and other digital platforms, to digital consoles, to smartphones, to other devices that are being able to access global markets. So the new challenge, of course, is how you run games as a service, how you acquire, retain, and monetize audiences, how you're going to use data to improve the experience and also the monetization. And if you're running a game as a service, is there enough margin at the end of that to cover your original development costs, your ongoing development costs, your user acquisition costs, and still retain a profit? These are the new challenges that people are having to deal with, and doing so very successfully. So whilst the App Store is a huge opportunity, it's also a very small shop window, and there's often several hundred dead birds for each angry bird that's developed out there. So you have to make sure that you use data in a way that improves your access to users and your acquisition and retention of users. But as an industry, there's always two challenges that remain: access to talent and access to funding. Where we're going to find the next software engineers, artists, and animators? How is a studio going to get finance? Whether it's a start getting bootstrap, is it possible to get a bank loan these days? Probably not. What about the dangers of project finance if you have to trade away your intellectual property? What about publisher funding? You have to give up the IP or at least share the IP with the publisher. Are you on a rev share basis? In which case, how do you negotiate the revenue share? Or do you give up some equity to be aligned with an investor who has the same ambitions and goals as you do as a developer? As I said, I turned investor in 2010. I've invested quite a few independent studios in Europe, mainly in the UK. Had a couple of very good exits. Playdemic created Golf Clash. We sold it to Warner Brothers in 2017. And it was probably, some of you will know that Warner Brothers sold Playdemic to Electronic Arts for $1.3 billion earlier this year. And Mediatonic was also an early investor. Again, that was sold to Epic for north of $500 million quite recently. Of course, Mediatonic, best known for Fall Guys. And when I invest, it's always looking for a partnership arrangement, a great creative person with an equal standing and operational level as the business person, each enabling each other to be successful. Through my angel investments, it's been difficult to even scratch the surface of the opportunity, and that's one of the reasons why I accepted the invitation to start a venture capital company, a venture capital fund with two co-founders, Luke Alvarez and Sherry Freeman. And we set about creating a fund that was going to be concentrating on the video games industry and associated technology and esports and what we call digital sports, which is effectively the digitization, gamification of real world sports, which gives off data which can be monetized. So we believe that games, esports, d-sports, and their technologies are a core ecosystem for entertainment, economic, and social life in the new economy. That's our basic mantra. We also are very aware that Europe in particular has over-delivered in content creation, but has always been underserved by capital. Only a fraction of the games companies in Europe receive venture capital funding, and Hiro is here to do something about that. We've made 20 investments so far, and we're always looking for new talent and opportunities. And I'm well aware of the incredible talent that exists in Russia. I had dealings with 1C in the 90s, and I'm well aware of the incredible success of the likes of Zeptolab and Playwrights with Fishdom and Gardenscapes. Strong heritage of PC development and understanding of of technology and also entertainment. So if anybody wants to contact me for VC funding, you know where I am. So we do Series A, Series B. What by that we mean Series A being 1 to 3 million euros and Series B being 3 to 7 million euros. We fund what we call the gap. A lot of companies are able to get off the ground through friends and family, through various government initiatives in the UK. The enterprise investment scheme is very tax advantageous for investors, and has seen the birth of many video games companies that might not have got started otherwise. And later on, there's lots of capital around to accelerate growth in very mature businesses. But there's that gap, the 22 to 20 million euro requirement that's missing right now, and that's where Hiro's finds its sweet spot. So we will also look at startups, but we tend to do a little bit more follow-on funding. So the trends we're seeing, the rise of hypercore, hybrid casual, where different mechanics are coming together to create a new experience. I think I just mentioned PlayUK. I think they evidence that more than anybody else. We've seen the sports strategy and mobile growing. Everyone's talking about the metaverse these days, is massively social games where people come together to play and to be. There is lots of exciting dynamics happening in the games industry. And, I've been in this game industry some 45 years, and I have no intention of retiring ever. So some top tips, I think, from me, if you're looking to start a games company. I don't know where you are in the ecosystem, but for me, it's don't be afraid of failure. Failure is success, work in progress, but make sure you fail fast. Retain ownership of your intellectual property. Try not to trade it away for project finance. Do what you're good at and partner with somebody to do the jobs you can't do or don't want to do. As I said, Playdemic and Mediatonic evidence that completely brilliantly, in that the creative and the business were working in partnership at the very top of the company which results in their success, doing what they were both best at. And this is a people business, so you have to treat people well. So again, ideas are cheap, and it's the execution of the idea that's hard. And if that idea doesn't work out, just stop it quickly and take your learnings and move on. Don't start out by saying, I'm going to make lots of money. Money should be a byproduct of doing something that you really enjoy and do it well. And if you do it well, because you enjoy doing it, you will be rewarded ultimately. Try not to be a kind of Me Too person. Try to be different if you can. I get pitched with people saying it's like a combination of this and that. And frankly, it's not enough innovation can be a good reason not to invest. And also make yourself investor ready before asking for investor funding. When we were in the 70s trying to get that bank loan, to be fair to the bank manager, we didn't really present very well. We were just excited by Dungeons and Dragons. We didn't really have any PowerPoints to show them about cash flows and management plans and projections and costs. We were just young and enthusiastic. That just afraid does not work today at all. And it didn't work then. And if you can, to give comfort to an investor, do what the Americans say, have some skin in the game. Show that you're invested in it with at least a lot of time and effort so you can demonstrate something in a meaningful way. And hopefully you've put some money in yourself, because that shows real commitment. Understand the business of games. It's getting more complex, but it's really important to understand the business models, the distribution models, partnerships, platforms, and data science, which is pointed out data. But last but not least, for me, the most important thing is gameplay. When people ask me what are the 3 most important things about a game, I always say gameplay. Technology and graphics are vital, but they play a supporting role. And of course, we want to be told a story, but a story in which you, the player, control the action, rather like my old Fighting Fantasy game books. So ensure that gameplay is the #1 mantra. And if you're going mobile, top tip, have an open mouth icon. It's really important. If you want success, all the icons have to have open mouths. So I think that's about it from me. My life has been a game, and long may it continue. And whatever capacity you're in the industry, as a developer, as a publisher, as an artist, software engineer, or storyteller, lighting, whatever it may be, data scientist, lawyer, enjoy it. It's one of the best industries in the world. Thank you.
That was amazing, Ian. Thank you very much for that. I love the idea that all mobile games have to have an open mouth character at the end. That wasn't something I expected, so I love that. Thank you. You've obviously put your Twitter there so people can get in touch with you and ask you questions if they want. If there are any questions from the audience now, please put them in the Q&A at the bottom of the screen, and I will endeavour to get through as many of those as possible. Should we come away from your slides, Ian, and get you more in full picture?
Yeah,
Shall we do
do
that? So if you can stop sharing.
Yeah, I'll just
Wonderful. So we can see you in full glory. If that's
I'm still
all right.
here.
Yeah, you're still there. Yeah, that's all right. Oh dear, right. That was in many ways a whistle-stop tour through an amazing career, interspersed with an awful lot of really valuable advice about the games industry, which is fabulous. We'll come back to a lot of those points, but I'd like to talk about you a little bit, if that's all right. Some of your motivation. So we heard this story, the excitement of the D&D. You're still playing D&D, aren't you, every month? Isn't that right?
Yeah, of course.
Can't get away from
I
it.
play more board games, honestly. These behind me, I play with a group I've been playing with from the 80s. In the group is Steve Jackson, my co-founder of Workshop, and also Peter Molyneux and Clive Robert, who's also at 505, and a couple of other friends. And we play board games, and I write a newsletter, the Games Night newsletter, in which I just kind of tear them apart in the week. And we keep scores, and at the end of the year, there's a cup to be presented to the winner.
Well, Ian, you're quite a competitive individual. I was about to ask about the competitiveness of these clubs. You know,
winners are grinners.
Well, the idea is to keep these people as friends, so don't beat them too much. And I like the story of you leaving the UK and going to the US and really risking everything and seeing what you could come up with. That shows a real sort of entrepreneurial spirit. Now, diving a little bit deeper into that, so you successful author, things are going brilliantly for you there. Why do you take that leap into games? What's the sort of the motivation for that? What have you seen in games in those days that attracted you?
Well, I'm a games player. It was very easy. I used to play games at school. In those days, it was Monopoly and chess. And then I discovered American war games and diplomacy, and I just loved the social interaction of games. And
but then into video games, I was saying more specifically, you know, that's a bit of a leap, isn't it, or is it not a leap?
Not really. It's play. It's still rules and play and challenges and puzzles and of course player versus player now more than ever. So if you can replicate a kind of playful experience, it doesn't matter what platform you're on, whether it's analog or digital. I just enjoy play, and video games gives you a whole new playground, as it were, to build worlds that you can't possibly do in a board game. Whereas board games and books rely a lot on the imagination. You're able to build these incredible worlds with video games, and being part of a team that can create, you know, kind of effectively interactive cinema or even a small puzzle game, I think is incredible. And just the fact that we are, as human beings, playful by nature. For me, it's all one and the same.
And I'm interested when you get involved with Domark and then into Eidos and bring those companies together. What was the games industry like in those days?
Well, Eidos came about in '95 when we floated on the stock exchange. I invested in Denmark. So I took equity instead of royalties in when they started off in '85. And it was the 8-bit, 16-bit days. And I joined Denmark soon after the 16-bit market was about to fall off the edge of a cliff. So wasn't the best time to be starting off. It was kind of crisis management from the get-go, because these 32-bit machines were on the horizon, the PlayStation, the Saturn, and that was all sounded very exciting. But in the meantime, all the inventory, talking about physical products and inventory problems, was a problem for Denmark. And not long after I joined the company, realized that things were not as good as I thought they were when I invested in the company. But we managed to turn it around, and we put these 4 companies together to create Nuco Eidos, which we floated in '95. And of course, the big breakthrough came with the opportunity to acquire Centergold, which is the only other publicly quoted company at the time. They were also suffering from inventory problems as the demise of the 16-bit market, and they were listed. So we were able to acquire them in March '96. And part of the due diligence process was I, being the so-called games expert, and I was executive chairman. My remit was, as a portfolio, was to look at all the studios owned by Centergold. And so I went first to see Silicon Dreams near Oxford, and then it was snowing. It was like late February '96, and I talked to the CEO, and he said, "Well, go and see this other company, Core Design, up in Derby." I said, "Well, it's snowing. It's just drive back." So anyway, he convinced me I should go over there, and I was greeted by Jeremy Heath-Smith, the managing director, a fantastic guy at Core Design, and he showed me all these games that were in development. And in the very last room was this female character on the screen, and I thought, "Wow, what's this? It's a 3D character moving into the screen into a 3D world." I was so used to all these side-scrolling 2D games.
Yeah.
So, and then met the team, and just kind of blown away by the fact that it was a female character, but a strong, independent, athletic, great character. But the worlds that they created, the technology was just outstanding. You could actually move the camera and could navigate the environments, and with these 3 pillars of combat, exploration, and puzzle solving, kind of all the planets were aligned. So after saying goodbye to Jeremy on the drive back, I called our CEO and said, "Look, we really have to buy this company." So we acquired Centergold, and really got Tomb Raider almost for free. It wasn't really priced in because no one knew what a success it would be. And so we launched it in October that year, and I think we had 100,000 units in the budget, and over time ended up selling 7 million copies.
It's interesting because my next question was, did you know it was going to be a successful title? But it sounds like there was something there that got you interested. There was
something. Everyone thought it was amazing, but no one knew how amazing.
Yeah. And did you expect the impact that game made on the broadness of society? It just went so far beyond, as you showed in your presentation. Surely no one could have expected that.
No, I mean, it's the first non-human to be on the front cover of Face magazine, which always had people who recognize. So here was a digital character, and then she became part of the Cool Britannia, Tony Blair's Cool Britannia mandate. And so games were beginning to have a cultural impact in a big way then, and Lara Croft was certainly at the forefront of that. And I remember when Larry Gordon Associates, who had been commissioned by Paramount to be the producers on the Tomb Raider movie, because we'd licensed the movie rights to Paramount, with them coming over and saying, "We'd like Angelina Jolie to play the role of Lara Croft." So that's absolutely fine with us, no problem whatsoever. But joking apart, she was an incredible human being. Incredibly intelligent and just charming and understated and just perfect for that role. So it was an ideal casting.
And interesting that you talk about the sort of the breakthrough of a female lead character. Any idea why we haven't seen that perhaps continue in recent years?
Well, I think that's down to other people to create their own characters. We did pretty well with Lara Croft. I mean, there's no reason whatsoever why there shouldn't be more. I mean, there are some, but they haven't quite hit the the kind of the James Bond equivalent in movies of that iconic character that survived the test of time.
Yeah. Interesting though, isn't it? How it's perhaps not taken off a little bit more. Certainly when you look at the dominance of female players in games today, just over 50% actually of players today are women of games. You think that would be reflected a little bit more in that content?
No doubt it will.
And it was really nice that you talked about the increase of actually women leaders, business leaders in the games industry as well, inspiring and leading. And that, this is all due to that steps that you took early on with Tomb Raider, almost certainly.
Well, it's absolutely important. I think it's reflective of where the industry is going. It's still relatively a young industry. In terms of the film, we're not really much beyond black and white in terms of time that's passed. And yet, I think it's advanced so much. I mean, let's face it, back in the early days, it was young guys making content for young guys. So it's either shoot something or kick something. You're sort of using guns or some sports. But over time, there's been diversity in content creation, and now diversity in content creation. So it's truly reflective and representative of society in general, which has to be a great thing.
And also reflective experience. There's a question in the chat about how much has your rich board game experience helped your career in video games? What do you think to that?
Well, these games I have behind me, there's over 1,000 in my room here, is that I don't get them just for collecting sake. There's some great mechanics in board games. And when it comes to games design, there's some really important lessons to be learned from playing good board games that engage people, that have that ability to create meaningful choices, to create a situation where everybody's involved all the time, not just kind of bored waiting for your turn to come around again, where you do something in isolation. How board games really engage people, and how board games also choose some very interesting themes that could become video games. So there's an awful lot to be learned from just game mechanics from board games.
And talking about, there's an interesting question here about one of our audience has been reading a book series named Choose Your Own Adventure. Do you take it as a compliment that those kinds of books have appeared and taken, or are they just a copycat ripoff, this person has asked?
Well, no, Choose Your Own Adventures came out around the same time as Fighting Fancy. It might have even been a little bit before, but there was a huge difference. There's actually a trademark term, Choose Your Own Adventure, owned by now Choose Co. And that they were more kind of choose your own ending to a story. They were a narrative in which you effectively chose between chapters how you wanted the story to go. So it was much less choice, and there was no game system, whereas Fighting Fantasy game books have a lot more choices, 400 paragraphs, but also a game system attached to it. So it's branching narrative like analog hypertext, but with a game system for fighting monsters, for deciding the outcome of events. So Fighting Fantasy is a lot more gamified in that context than Choose Your Own Adventure, which is just interactive story.
Right. And when you're thinking about your stories, your books, do you think on a global level? I mean, how on earth can you cater for an audience that's so diverse? The question here from the audience is that the Russian mentality is very different from the English, at least to their view. How can you make something that works globally? Because it's been an amazing thing.
Yeah, Fighting Fantasy ended up being published in over 35 countries, and with some 25 languages. So they do resonate with a global audience. But the thing is that everyone likes stories, but if you can be part of that story, happy days. So this is a fantasy setting normally, worlds of monsters and magic, in which you are on a quest to slay some evil beast or find some legendary treasure. and this is all about you. So a normal book is a linear, effectively a broadcast, and where you may or may not relate to the hero or heroine of that book. And sometimes you can get bored with it. With the Final Fantasy game book, you are the hero, you're empowered to make all the decisions. It gives you agency. And that agency is really enjoyable. As I say, it speaks to Generation Z in particular, to be in control of their destiny. And so that basic premise does have global appeal. So they sold 7 million copies originally in the UK, but they also sold 3 million copies in France, over 3 million copies in Japan. They did really well in the USA. I believe they were published in Russia, but I never got to see any copies. They were published in all over the world, as you say. So it's just that everyone likes mythology, everyone likes hearing about stories, but guess what? These books allow you to participate in the stories.
A really difficult question for you, with the audience seeing so many board games behind you. Someone has dared to ask the question, which would you recommend for a beginner? I mean, clearly it depends on what kind of character you are, or is there a sort of an established route to get into board games?
Well, I'm glad you didn't ask me which is my favorite board game, because I always have to say, it's like asking me what's my favorite child, and I've got 4.
I'm going to ask you what your favorite game is in a minute, so just be prepared for that one. But
so it depends on a number of things: how many players, how long you want to play for, do you like complex or light games? So it's difficult to recommend one size fits all, for want of a better expression. But the good introductory games for me are games like Ticket to Ride, Splendor, Catan, and if you want something a bit more meaty, games like Century Spice Road, Stone Age, Small World. I mean, there's a lot out there. But there's a good site called boardgamegeek.com, which got just about every game ever made is on there. But they do have a rating of games, but the ones that rate the best tend to be quite complex games, because it's quite a dedicated audience that goes to boardgamegeek.com.
Now there's the design of board games is that most people have a chance with a bit of skill to actually achieve things in a board game and be competitive. But is there a board game where you would be 99% confident you would beat everyone you played against? Is there one that you're just an absolute legend at, Ian?
No.
No, fair enough. Okay, that was good.
But if people can't buy the physical copies, there's also another website called boardgamesarena.com, where a lot of the games I just spoke about you can play with friends online, but it's just effectively physical components but in 2D, so it's a top-down view. And all the way through lockdown and the pandemic, our games group played on boardgamesarena.com and having a Zoom window open so we could negotiate our deals and laugh at each other when you get stabbed in the back. So
love it.
That's always a good one to look at.
Is there any dressing up involved, by the way?
Never.
Okay, all right. Now you talk really fondly about the UK games industry and its sort of location as a destination for games development. But if we look under the surface, why do you think why do you think the UK is such a special place to make games?
It has a rich cultural history of making games. We would go back to the very early 80s, as I said in my talk, people like Matthew Smith and Peter Molyneux, on the back of computing at home being available on a wide scale and learning about computing skills in school. In the hands of a creative nation, that's always going to happen, I think. And this creative streak we have as a nation, as I said, the film, fashion, music, etc. We're very good at storytelling, and on a national level, creativity is everywhere, but opportunity always isn't. So it doesn't have to be London focused. Teams in the UK, as you well know, are scattered everywhere, and there are clusters around, from Guildford in Newcastle and Liverpool and around Dundee and Brighton and Bristol. Those incredible gaming hubs, and it's a very collaborative industry. People tend to help each other, and there's a fantastic talent pool, not just from the creative point of view, but software engineers, although they're getting more and more difficult to find.
Indeed,
as the industry heats up, and it's becoming a global phenomenon. But the UK is a great place to do business, and of course, from the support you get from Ukie and from Tiger and from government with the EIS and SEIS schemes, and of course, video games tax relief has been a huge bonus to the industry. So there's a lot of good things happening. Even, dare I say it, the media is becoming more positive to the industry to say, this is actually a viable career opportunity and proposition, and teachers and parents are now beginning to understand that there's more to it than just making a few 18-rated games. This is an actual huge cultural phenomenon, and all the ancillary industries around it, whether it's sport industries, service industries, advertising, marketing, legal, accounting. It's building a pretty rich ecosystem. You'd be able to tell me more accurate than I, but it's something like $7 billion of activity in the UK from the gaming industry, which is pretty big.
It
and
is.
It's no surprise, of course, that a lot of our studios have been looked at and acquired by overseas companies. The USA and Japan and China are looking very favorably at the UK talent here and the studios and the content that's being created. And I would always argue to government that please support this industry, otherwise they could leave a situation where everything is foreign owned. But the one good thing, of course, is maybe that's not such a big problem, because we can always start again. With a constant ability to create new ideas and new services and products in the industry.
Yeah, about 250 new UK games companies set up a year. So there's plenty of that coming through. We'll come back to the investment thing, because there's been lots of questions about it, and I'm really interested to hear your quite unique view on it, given the career you've had looking at that. But it's probably a really difficult question to answer, but I'm going to throw it anyway. If we talk about the UK being such a special place, if we look at the Russian games market, you've got some amazing talent, but it's still sort of an unknown talent. There's still a bit of work for hire. There's not too much of sort of own IP and development. I'm not going to ask you to fix that or to change it, but do you have a steer on perhaps what the Russian games industry could do to sort of build its own identity?
I think it needs to make a lot more noise about its success stories. I mentioned that I had dealings, commercial dealings during the Eidos days with a company called 1C, based out of Moscow. We saw how Zeptalad did incredibly well with Cut the Road. We see how PlayUK did incredibly, monumentally successful with Fishdom and Gardenscape. So it's not for a lack of ability or a lack of success. I think there's just not enough noise made around it. There is fantastic things happening in Russia, but they tend to be not telling the whole world about those successes and not having enough dealings and relationship with the rest of the world. We go to lots of conferences and games conferences and events in Europe and also in the USA, when we're allowed to. I think next year we'll be going to DICE and GDC and Tokyo Game Show and others. But there's nothing on my radar that says I must go to the next Russian games conference.
Yeah.
So I think getting a good trade association, I don't know if there is one in Russia, getting conferences organized to invite foreign speakers and get that ecosystem around the studios that are clearly doing quite well and very well in the case of PlayUK, but I'm sure they could do so much more, because there's no shortage of incredible software engineers in Russia and creative talent. So it's a question of building an infrastructure and ecosystem around that talent to reach out to the world on a greater scale, I would say.
I want to come to, thank you for that. That was an awkward question, but I think that's a brilliant answer, and lots of things for our audience to think about, and the people that we're working with here in the British Council, about how we can help encourage that growth as well, which we should be doing in partnership if possible. Such a varied history in investment, you know, going through angels, and look at the amazing companies that you've picked to invest in over the years as an angel investor, and then onto VCs. How on earth can you pick a studio to be sort of an angel level investor in? What are the things that really get you to go, yeah, I'm going to invest in that company? I mean, you mentioned IP. Is that core to it? What are the other things that are core?
The main thing is people. It's the senior management team. As I said, with Playdemic and Mediatonic, it was the creative visionary and product maker on an equal footing with the person who's going to run the whole show.
Right.
And a lot of creative people tend to not want to let go and want to do it all themselves, which I think is rather pointless, because you're not doing what you're good at, and you probably don't enjoy doing the outreach to accounting firms or to order new desks and chairs. That should not be a function that you should be doing. So it's how the team is set up.
Okay.
Then there's a whole raft of things set underneath that, from IP ownership, business model, self-publishing, self-developing, publisher funded, work for hire. What kind of business are you? What's your business model? What have you done before, previously? What have you invested in personally? What have you learned through your previous iterations of whatever games you've done before? Do you understand the importance of data? Are you data driven? I mean, I'm not saying a game concept should be born out of data, but data should be used quite quickly to validate the original concept and idea. Of course, technology. What is your technology stack? What does it look like? Is it going to fall over if it scales up? What's your back-end infrastructure like? I mean, there's a whole raft of questions, but of course, number one is always gameplay.
It's always the gameplay. Love that. So a couple of things you put in your list on the final slides that maybe might need a little bit more detail for the audience. You use the phrase "fail fast." What does that mean?
I mean, it's pretty obvious with all the data available that you know if a product is working or it isn't working. So, you know, if you're not getting retention, and if you're not getting the monetization, if your costs for installs are more than you would expect, just kind of suck it up and move on, really, and don't go bust trying to turn something around that's never going to turn around, because that should not be seen as failure. Say you'll learn so much from that process that the next game is more likely to succeed. You know, Angry Birds was not Rovio's first game; it was their 51st game. So they had a lot of learning before they ultimately came up with Angry Birds. And there's lots of examples of other companies who've failed many times, but make sure that you have the capacity to go against the well. So, you know, that's why I say investment is so important, to give you the runway to allow you to fail and ultimately become successful. You know, Mediatonic, it was been in business for 9 or 10 years before Fall Guys came around, but they were a great team. It was just a question of upping their game, no pun intended, until ultimately they got a global hit.
I like the phrase talking about make yourself ready before asking for funding. You know, get your business absolutely where it needs to be before you go and get investment. How does a studio know when the time is right? Are there sort of indicators that now is the time to push on and go and get that investment?
Well, if you're struggling and unable to hire the best talent, you know then you need money. But unfortunately, a lot of creative people don't know how to go about getting money. I mean, I didn't myself back in the early days of workshop. You just kind of breeze into the bank manager and expect them to give it to you on the spot because you found a good game. And they need to know whether you're able to run a business. Do you understand what profit is, and if I do invest in a company, they have to understand that that investment is not profit. It's starting capital, it's working capital.
Yeah.
Don't confuse the two. They still have to execute using that capital to ultimately make a profit. So it's take advice on how you actually raise capital, whether it's raising it from friends and family. If you're starting off in the UK, check out the EIS and SEIS schemes, get pre-approval, because in SEIS, an investor can effectively get 50% of their investment back at the end of the tax year. And if the company goes on to success, as long as you hold those shares for some 3 years, there's no capital gains tax to pay. And if it does go bust, you can write off another 40% of that investment. So this is a fantastic scheme. And I'm sure it would be a great way of other countries kickstarting their games ecosystem. But the thing is to know how to get investment and understand what is required. At Hiro, we run these events called Dark Star, where we present our fund to people. There's another one coming up soon, I can't remember when. And we had 240 development companies on the last one, and we show you what VCs are looking for, why they invest, why they don't invest, and then you can pitch, and we'll certainly look at it.
That's really interesting. And yeah, we need to sort of circulate the details of Hiro so some of the audience can have a look at that and see how they can get involved. So we'll make sure.
Capital, HIRO, named after Hiro Protagonist, the main character in Neil Stephenson's book about the metaverse, Snow Crash. So we were a little bit ahead of the metaverse speak.
The metaverse. I was interested in the if we can just go back to a little bit about sort of Ian the person, if that's all right, and then we will come back to some business things in a minute if that's good with you. But you've seen a lot of games, you've reviewed a lot of games, you've published a lot of games. What are the games that that other people have made that you think, oh, I wish I was involved in that project? Are there any games out there that you think, yeah, I'd love to have been part of that?
Well, there's probably hundreds out there, isn't there? I've only touched a few.
There's no Moby Dick. There's no one that you really wanted that just wasn't there. The one that consumed you.
The one that I played all the time. I think Civilization, I spent a large part of my life playing. I mean, at my age, I'm useless at any Twitch game. I'm dead in 10 seconds if I venture out with a gun into some universe. So I have to use my my thinking powers to succeed. I'm used to like all kind of games like that, whether it was just Age of Empires as well, and Advance Wars on the old DS games. But clearly the best kind of fun is when you're connected to people. So when I was a little bit more agile with my reflexes, I used to play Virtua Tennis on Dreamcast. And
oh, rare, yeah.
Those kind of game, great fun, where it's just fantastic gameplay. It's just something about, you don't worry about the graphics so much. Graphics, I say, plays a supporting role. It's all about that thrilling gameplay. So connected games is ideal for me, but I enjoy Civilizations, conquering the world in my own living room.
And you've been around the world, Ian. You've met everyone you could perhaps imagine you'd want to meet in the games industry, or is there someone on your bucket list in the games industry that you haven't met yet that you'd really like to have a chat with?
I'm trying to think of who. You're right, I haven't met a lot of people.
Or maybe you've met someone in passing and you'd just like to have a cup of tea with them or a beer with them, whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, I've met him but never spoken to him. It was Miyamoto. Right. I'd love to have had some time with him. I've met him, but so that would be, I guess, on my bucket list for spending time with. I mean, I've hung out with some pretty interesting characters in my time, from Nolan Bushnell and others, and Gary Gygax, and a whole raft of games industry luminaries, Will Smith, and I mean, yeah, lots of them, but never spent time with Miyamoto, and that would be great.
You've not mentioned one of your other passions, actually, football. You're a huge football fan.
I am.
Do you want to share your allegiances here? You've got weren't you chairman of a football club for a while?
No, I wasn't a chairman. When I was chairman of Eidos, we were sponsors of my team, Manchester City.
Right. Okay.
From 99 to 2002, we were shirt sponsors. And that was another kind of living the dream experience. And yeah, it was, I got to meet all my heroes when I used to watch them as a kid. So
yeah,
Colin Bell and Francis Lee, Mike Summerby. That was great, but they weren't doing that well. They were in the second division when we agreed to do the deal. So we had 1 year in the first division, which is now the championship, 1 year in the Premier League, and then they got relegated, so another year in the championships. But it was incredible experience. So we used to have Lara Croft on the pitch before the game.
Yeah.
Got to meet Noel Gallagher from Oasis, a fellow City fan, and happy days. And City, of course, doing well. So I'm not kind of just a Johnny come lately to the team. I am from Manchester. I was born very close to Main Road where they used to play and used to go with my dad. And so it's been a lifelong thing. We had 40 years of rubbish, but in the last few years, of course, they've been amazing. So I'm getting my, I think, patient, well-earned success enjoyment from supporting City, which usually was kind of dealing with adversity most of the time.
Yeah, all good things come to those who wait, and I think you served your apprenticeship with that lot. And Noel Gallagher always says that was one of his favourite meetings when he had a chat with you. So that's the way it works.
Only it was Liam.
Oh, it was Liam. Sorry. Oh my word. Can we talk a little bit about talent, because you spent an increasing amount of time supporting that talent pipeline, particularly in the UK. I mean, we talked earlier about the importance of having talent to keep the industry going and to bring those new studios through. Where's the talent coming from in the UK? Because there's 3,000 vacancies in the games industry in the UK at the moment.
Yeah, I'm sure there's more than that, to be honest. But where's it coming through? Well, I think you're aware, as you mentioned, the Livingstone Hope review, which is now 10 years old. I used to complain to Ed Vasey, the culture minister at the time, about there was simply not enough software engineers for our industry, let alone all the other digital industries that were booming at the time. And he tasked Alex Openeye to write this review, which was published by Nesta, and who also supplied us with two incredible researchers who did most of the heavy lifting, and also the costs of doing the various polls that were required to get our information, and largely came down to the way software was being taught in schools as not being fit for purpose. In the 80s, they had programmable computers. As I said, the BBC computer was a cornerstone of computing in schools. But over time, it changed to using other people's software. And at the turn of the century, children were learning Word, PowerPoint, and Excel, which is effectively teaching them how to use other people's software, rather than being taught how to create their own software. What we were doing effectively was teaching children how to read, but not how to write. They could make a game, they couldn't play a game, they could use a website, couldn't make a website. So our point was, how do you move children being consumers to creators? And we made 20 recommendations in Next Gen, the main one being to put computer science on the curriculum as an essential discipline. And also another one being to have art to count in the English baccalaureate, which it wasn't and still isn't. It doesn't count as part of the Ofsted league table components. So it's a kind of a nice to have rather than an essential discipline, and which again is the bedrock of the games industry, computing and arts. I mean, without it, it's not so great. So anyway, long story short, as you know, computing was put on the curriculum in 2014. We got to Michael Gove, who's Secretary of State at the time, and he was in agreement, and it happened. But my worry now is that it's still quite a dry subject in school. The project work doesn't count for anything. It's still a written exam, usually about quite boring stuff. So the magic of creativity is lost in the subject. Ukie were very supportive at the time and still are. Next Gen Skill campaign carried on and did its job, but the establishment kind of missed an opportunity in many ways to take this. So that's one of the reasons why I've opened my own school, the Livingstone Academy in Bournemouth, as a kind of flagship for digital creativity. So we've got an incredible principal there, Kim, who's really executing on our premise of collaboration, project work, contextualizing learning by doing, working with industry, working in teams, and having good exam results as a byproduct of this more authentic learning, or as opposed to the sage on the stage with their broadcast model.
Yeah.
People to really understand how to apply knowledge, not just to memorize and regurgitate knowledge. We've got these smartphone devices and a thing called Google where we can get just about any knowledge we require. So it's the application of knowledge, I think. It's going to be great. And part of that, of course, is digital making skills and good art and animation skills. So education is the root cause and could be the root solution for a successful games industry. So we need do more to support the creative industries and digital creativity.
It's amazing the work you've done in it, but it is a shame that government hasn't really picked up that and made it happen, isn't it?
Well, they have in a sense that this is not a private school. This is a state school, and I guess they're going to wait and see how it pans out. But I'm delighted today we had, for our first Year 7 intake, we had 150 places and we had 450 children apply. Wow. So that was great. And next year is also looking like it's going to be oversubscribed. So far, so good.
I think we could talk all day about that sort of careers and talent opportunity, but I ought to ask some of the questions that have come through from the audience as well, actually. We might try and skip through a couple of these as quickly as we can, dare I say it. Someone's asked your opinion on AR games. Is that, and I think they're thinking of specifically that sort of hybrid between tabletop and mobile and the like. What's your view on sort of AR games?
Well, you can see VR, AR, mixed reality, immersive worlds becoming more evidenced around more, but it comes down to the platforms and the technology that allows that to happen in a very convenient way. VR, for example, struggled for many years. It's only now with wireless headsets and with Oculus 2 and devices where you don't feel any motion sickness that it's becoming more of a mass market proposition. But some of these devices have been clunky in the past. It reminds me of mobile phones back in the 80s with a great big brick with loads of wires hanging out. So when VR and AR becomes effectively like a pair of Oakleys that just sits on your nose and you're able to have effectively no barrier to that experience, that'll become mass adoption. But clearly, these digital worlds connected to the real worlds are going to be increasingly evident everywhere.
Excellent. Another question from someone who's currently studying 3D modeling and art in an indie game. They want to explore more sort of storytelling in video games. I mean, storytelling is incredibly important, isn't it, as part of that process? But how do you get seen to be a storyteller? How do you sort of promote yourself as such?
Write good stories.
Right.
And send them into studios. Say, look, I can tell you stories. I think I had in my penultimate slide about gameplay. I also had in the corner there thing about the importance of story. Clearly, that's becoming more and more necessary and a component part of good games now. And of course, the early days and the horsepower of the consoles and PCs wouldn't allow. There was not enough capacity to have decent contextual music or any decent music at all, or storytelling, or sound effects, or decent graphics. But now this much more immersive experience where it's like interactive cinema. Storytelling is vital to any good game. So I think budding storytellers have got lots of opportunity available to them right now.
We've heard you say gameplay at least 3 times. this evening. There's quite a few questions about gameplay. Questions about, what makes or breaks a gameplay experience. That's a really interesting concept. So, without giving away too many secrets, why is gameplay so special, and how can you make a game stand out on the gameplay concept? Is it all about innovation, or sticking to existing routes that people will recognize? What's the core of that?
I don't think you can define gameplay in any one way, but for me, it's what makes me want to come back time and time again. What is that little sprinkle of magic fairy dust that makes it a compelling experience? What is it that makes me want to engage with other people? What makes me want to do deals, or what makes me want to renege on deals? What is it that satisfies me from having achieved things in that game? I mean, there's just a ton of stuff that makes great gameplay. And it's certainly not the graphics. You can look at a really awful looking game, but if the gameplay is fun, you're spellbound. But it's that intense gameplay experience that makes you want to come back and back and back. And it's not just about, it's got to have 40 hours of gameplay. Because it can be half an hour of intense gameplay and I'd be happy, or 2 hours of intense gameplay, as long as it's priced right. You just got to keep that adrenaline rush going, and satisfaction and reward, feeling good, and don't make people feel stupid, because they'll always blame the game. You've got to make a game that has kind of this, as I said in my chart, kind of zen flow through it, where you're going through in a very satisfying way. There's problems, but you can overcome those problems. You're not suddenly reaching a wall that you can't get over and become frustrated. So there's many component parts, and of course you can start attaching human attributes to that gameplay experience. Maslow's theory, hierarchy of needs, of satisfying the human being's soul and wants, desires, at the same time merge with games mechanics. I mean, it's not an exact science, but if you've done it long enough, you kind of know what needs to be in there, like a recipe.
Yeah, the secret sauce. Yeah, love that. We are coming to the end of this. Before I thank you for your time, the floor is yours to tell us what excites you about where the games industry is heading. I mean, you said earlier you're not done yet. There's lots more to come from Ian. What are the things that you're particularly looking forward to going forward?
This connected world, these massively social games that are coming online. I mean, you're seeing it manifest itself. I was talking about the metaverse, of course. You've seen it on Facebook with the mile games, the massive interactive live events where the participant, the viewing public can influence the outcome of games. The thing about the game industry is always transformed by technologies. New opportunities come along all the time, of course, with challenges. But every other entertainment industry is pretty static in what it can do. But the game industry is driven by innovation and technology. And if people say to me, what's going to be like in 5 years' time? I say, I've not a clue, but I look forward to that day. It's hard to know what's happening in the next 5 weeks.
Ian, it's been amazing to spend some time with you this evening. So really appreciate that. At this point in the talk, there would be standing ovations, but we're not going to get that tonight because of the nature of this virtual event. But rest assured, it is happening all the way across Russia in particular this evening. So thank you. We call these inspirational talks, and you have been inspiration this evening. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Sam.
I'd like to thank all the participants, attendees that have come along to this evening as well. As I mentioned, this is part of a wider series. We have another talk the same time next week, and we'll be joined by Fiona Sperry, who was at leading in Criterion development when such great games as Burnout and Need for Speed were brought to market, and now runs her own indie studio, Three Fields Entertainment. So a fascinating story there for next week. It's the same time. This talk will be made available afterwards. Please share it with people, spread the word, and you'll also be sent links to the previous events so you can hear from some of our other inspirational speakers. Have a good evening, and thank you very much. And thanks again to you, Ian.
Bye-bye.